One of my favorite sales assets to build on a podcast is a sales page. It sounds weird, but it's one of my favorite things to do. I'm going to give you some examples today. We're going to talk about what this looks like, and we're going to normalize some things, namely the anxiety that rose up inside of you when I said sales page. Let's get into it. Welcome to Uncommonly More with Stacey Harris. I am Stacey. I'm the host of this show and the CEO of podcast production agency Uncommonly More. My team and I work with podcasters just like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of sales teams with professional, strategic podcast production. You know what? I think that's enough. Let's get into the show and we'll talk more there. Just a quick reminder, if you have not yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, we have a new November episode. So make sure you head over to podcastnewsroom.com and grab your access. That is the place with the news you need to know for a more profitable podcast. I love this conversation that we're going to have today. And I'm going to be really transparent, like uncomfortably transparent with you. I have attempted to record some version of this episode a couple of times. This is one of my more heavily outlined. I won't say scripted. There's chunks of text here, but it's information. And that's because this is such an incredible tool. It's such an important tool. And it's something that we talk a lot about with our production clients because we're talking to the idea that we're using our show to build sales assets. We're talking to the idea that this show, like your show, is built to help listeners make decisions. And that includes the decision to work with you. And that includes the decision to move into one offer over another because they have an understanding of what your offers are. And yes, a sales page on your website does that. And I want you to think about the real estate that is your smartphone. Now I want you to think about the real estate that is your preferred podcast player. Now I want you to think about the real estate that is your inbox. Or maybe your social media feed. Or, the internet as a whole. Because that's the place where your sales pages live. Your sales pages and the information that helps them break down the specifics of your offers and knowing which one is right for them mostly lives, traditionally, in social media, on your website, maybe in your email. But not many business owners, experts, are bringing the details of working with them to their podcast. They're bringing value. We know value is good. They're nurturing. Man, are we nurturing? But they're not giving a breakdown of here's how you work with me. Here's what that looks like. Here's how you prepare for it. We've talked about something like this before. Maybe you've heard me talk about the episode we have, what working with Uncommonly More looks like. That's a great example of these sales page-esque episodes. But I want to point you to another episode right now. I sat down with Lindsay Padilla, who's one of the co-founders of Hello Audio, which is the tool we use for private podcasts like the podcast newsroom. And we talked a little bit about this idea of the podcast player being another inbox, being another place where we can get information to a listener, to an interested party, to a warm lead. Yeah. Think about that. When we launched the podcast strategy intensives in September, the first place I dropped a real layout of what working with me for those calls looks like, it was the podcast newsroom. It's a 10-minute podcast. It's still there. It ended up later, just under a week later, I also released it to this feed. And so you can listen to it there if you'd like. But I introduced, here's what I'm doing. Here's this experiment that we're going to do. Here's this thing we're going to test in October. And now you can book your January session. Now There is a place where this kind of starts. There is a spot for you to figure out what that looks like. Now, you can also go to the website and learn about strategy calls and the podcast strategy intensives there. But I was able to really quickly just put it in front of people who already cared to listen to me. And that's incredible. And so think about this as another inbox. Think about this podcast feed as another way of getting information in front of your warm leads, because that's exactly what it is. They've subscribed to your podcast, just like they've subscribed to your email. They're interested in hearing more from you, but you have to be putting the info in there. So let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about what putting that out there looks like. What is the structure of an audio sales page? What does that look like? Well, I call it an audio sales page because honestly, it's going to be structured very similarly to a sales page. When I first recorded what working with uncommonly more looks like, I kind of just read the sales page. Now, I didn't read it like it was a script, but that's how I moved through it. When I was doing the episode initially, I was scrolling the page and reviewing the high points and talking through what that looked like. Now, that episode has evolved to a little bit more because we also set a lot of expectations about like what delivery looks like and what is needed from you. And I think that's the structural nuance that's most important, is when we talk about a sales page in the traditional terms of like on our website written word, we don't tend to talk as much about the process. We don't tend to talk as much about expectations of the person hiring us. And when we're in this kind of format, when we're talking about this audio sales page format, it gets a lot easier. It becomes a much more conversational, even though only one of us is talking, perspective, which allows us to set expectations in a different way. And so, yes, structure it very similarly to your sales page. And then layer in your storytelling. So if you listen to the What Working with Uncommonly More episode looks like now, you'll hear some of the stuff pulled from the sales page still, but you'll notice I've taken it more through a timeline. So from the time you reach out till we start working together, and we talk about what each step of that process is. And as I'm doing that, I'm pulling in things from the sales page, like headlines or bolded out copy or language that I know helps my right fit clients identify themselves. It helps you, if you're the one, to raise your hand and say, oh, yeah. It gives you that same, we talk a lot about this in copywriting, that same sort of nodding the head, right? Our headline, our hook, we want that first initial copy to be a real like, oh yeah, that's me. I'm doing that throughout the show still. We're still making sure we have that, see themselves in it, identify and understand their problem, and understand how this is the solution for that problem. And I feel like I should say this, although because you're questioning it, it's not possible. Let me say that. Occasionally, the feedback I get on this, and we're gonna shift into this in just a second, but normally the feedback I get on this is like, well, is that gonna be really salesy? Is it gonna just sound douchey? Like, am I just gonna sound like an asshole? And no, again, if you're worried about it, it's not actually possible. The dumbest guy in the room never thinks he's a dumb. So when I talk about these terms of like helping them identify themselves, seeing the problem, identifying that this is the correct solution for their problem, this isn't in a trick them way. This is in a giving them the information they need to see themselves. Because the reason I want to create an episode where you can see yourself and you can say, yes, Stacy, this is exactly what I need. Thank you. The reason I want to create that is because for every you that's going, oh, yes, thank you, I finally found this, produced by Mother Love and Show. there's somebody or more somebodies going, if I ever have to talk to that girl in person, I will lose my mind. For every person who says, I love the episode you did around being annoying and why you wanted to be annoying, there's 2 to 5 people who are going, yeah, you mission accomplished, you're annoying. Okay? So this isn't about tricking. This isn't about making somebody who's not fit for our work feel like they are. This is about making it really, really clear that the people who are a fit have found their fit. And for anyone who's ever had a hard time finding their fit, and maybe you have too, I know for me I have, that's such a gift. It's such a gift. And the reason I like doing this in this format and pulling together those sales page strategies, those tools that we've seen used in that space again and again, those same tactics that we see used there, and pair it with storytelling and connection. And that's what an audio sales page is. And that's how I want you to be structuring it. And that's why I'm talking about, you're going to structure it very similarly to a sales page. You're just going to sort of give them a different storytelling way of doing it. For us, for the What Working with Uncommonly More Looks Like episode, that's sort of timeliney. For me, with the podcast strategy intensive episode, it was more, here's the rundown. And it was very sales pagey. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what that looks like. Here's how much it's going to cost. Let's go. That's why it's a, I think, 9-minute episode. Because it could be. It could be this simple. Because I had a firm understanding of who it was for. And I have built a relationship that allowed me to show up in your podcast feed inbox and say, hey, raise your hand. Let's do this. Before we wrap up, I want to normalize something. I genuinely cannot think of a client who has started working with us in the last 18 to 24 months who I haven't recommended they do an episode like this. And their response, because I don't want to say always in the same way I don't like to say never, I will say 90% of the time, almost consistently, I will say this, consistently has been, so what does that look like? Am I going to sound salesy? Is it going to be douchey? Is that going to be interesting for them to listen to? Seriously, some version of this narrative of I don't want to bother anybody. I don't want to bother the people who showed up and asked to hear from me and who I know are struggling with this thing and I know I can help them. I would like to not tell them how to do it. It's so incredibly common. So if you're feeling that, as we're talking through this episode, if you're feeling that like, well, sure, Stacy did that. Sure, uncommonly more clients have done that. That's different. They're them. I can't do that. It is never going to be harder to do than it is right now. Seriously, this is the most difficult it will ever be to produce an episode like this. I call these kind of episodes hold your hair episodes. Because they're episodes that every time we recommend them, every time a client records them, I don't know if this is good enough. I don't know if we should release this. I don't know if it's valuable. I'm feeling a little, it's a technical term. And so I always assure them, I am here to hold your hair. It's fine. It's going to be good. And do you want to know what? These episodes convert. They work. And generally, once we've finished production and they listen to the show, they actually really like the way it came out. Because it's never going to be harder to do than it is before you've done it. And the next time you do it, it will be a little easier. And the next time after that, and the next time after that. I have now re-recorded the What Working with Uncommonly More episode 3 times. I think we've had 3 versions of that show now. Yeah. And guess what? I will almost definitely record it again next year. Because things change. And not even that like our offer changes that much, because our offer stays fairly similar. We haven't had a ton of change. We've added some additional benefits to working with us, some additional deliverables that we didn't have at the very beginning, but not a lot changes, but I learn more. I learn more about how you talk about this. I learn more about how you're feeling before we work together. I learn more about how you might feel after we work together. I learn more about your language, and I want to meet you where you're at now, not where I am. And so the episodes get re-recorded. And actually, that bit, this idea that it will never be harder than it is now, and that I'm going to be doing this again, and that it will get better, really helps. Knowing I'm going to get a do-over really helps. This episode is not written in stone. Quite frankly, if I wanted to go in and re-record it, and not even like as a new release, just go in and replace the audio file so that anybody new who downloads that year-old episode doesn't hear what I said the first time, I can do that. There's not a permanent record here. You absolutely have the ability to go in and make changes to it, to update it as you learn more, as you evolve, as you change things, as you get more confident doing these kind of episodes. And so don't let that, I'm just going to straight up call it the anxiety. Like, don't let that anxiety that this will come off douchey, that no one's going to find it interesting, that no one's going to want to listen to it, that it's going to, bother somebody. Don't let it stop you from creating something that is going to help people find you as their solution. You have to be willing to do uncomfortable things on your show for it to convert. This is one of those uncomfortable things. I get it. I also don't like it. But I think together we can do it. In fact, I know together we can do it. And if together you would like to do it, I am having conversations right now about starting production with us in January. So head over to uncommonlymore.com/podcast production, learn more about what working with us looks like. Maybe listen to the What Working With Us Looks Like episode and reach out. Let's have a chat about how we can help you produce shows like this for your podcast. I'll see you next week. If you made it to this point of the show and you still happen to be listening, which statistically is unlikely, I want to say thank you for listening. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I want to hear from you. So reach out on social or via email and let me know what actions you're going to take from today's episode, because honestly, that's why we produce this show. That's why I record this show. It's why my team does all the work to release this show, is so that we can help you. You can help make a difference in your show and consequently in your business. If you haven't left a review for the show, head over to ratethispod.com/more. It's an easy way to show some love to the show and also help us reach more podcasters who are looking for the same kind of support you were looking for. If you have any suggestions or ideas or thoughts you would like me to address on the show, be sure to reach out. Again, like I say a lot, this is the start of the conversation, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.